It seems as though the players and the WNBA old guarded media is finally ready to admit that Caitlin Clark, and Caitlin Clark solely, was the reason for the increase in these numbers, is the reason for all these new fans, is the reason for all this revenue, and is also the reason nobody is going to be watching these other women's basketball leagues that she is not.
That's the sound of reality hitting. After months of hype, empty promises, and manufactured buzz, the truth about Unrivaled is finally impossible to ignore. The arena was half empty on opening weekend. Half empty for a league that spent months teasing Caitlin Clark's involvement, that spent millions on marketing, that convinced investors this was the future of women's basketball. And now, even the media that protected them for months is finally admitting what we've been saying all along.
Yahoo Sports. Unrivaled runs into uncomfortable Caitlin Clark truth amid viewership decline, per analyst. Alrighty. Now, we been knew this, though. We been knew what was going on. As Unrivaled's second season unfolds, empty seats, tumbling ratings expose a league betting big on.
Yahoo Sports dropped the headline nobody wanted to write. Unrivaled runs into uncomfortable Caitlin Clark truth amid viewership decline. Uncomfortable is putting it mildly. This is a complete collapse of the narrative they've been selling since November 2. Rachel DeMita, former ESPN host and one of the few analysts willing to call this out early, broke down exactly how Unrivaled manipulated their audience. In November 2025, the league put out cryptic marketing materials, multiple references to the number 22, press releases saying, "Give us 22 minutes of your time." Social media posts with 222 timestamps scattered throughout. Fans immediately connected it to Caitlin Clark's jersey number. Some speculated Angel Reese might join too, since she also wore 22 in college. The hype machine went into overdrive. Sports blogs wrote speculation pieces. Fans debated whether Clark would actually sign. TNT and truTV promoted the upcoming season with the assumption that something big was coming. And then January 17th, 2025 arrived. Season 1 tipped off. No Caitlin Clark, no Angel Reese, no explanation for the 22 references, just a league that had used Clark's name and number to generate buzz they couldn't deliver on.
November 2025 marketing tease that hinted at Clark's involvement through cryptic 2022 references, only for the superstar to pass, leaving the league's credibility in tatters just as season 2 tipped off on January 5th, 2026. This bait and switch didn't just disappoint fans, it amplified Unrivaled's vulnerability as viewership craters and WNBA rising salaries steal the spotlight from what once made the upstart league appealing. So all of the money they're getting in Unrivaled was a big deal, but now with the new WNBA offer, it ain't much of a big deal at all.
Here's why that bait and switch matters more than just disappointed fans. Trust is currency in sports media. When you're an upstart league trying to compete with the WNBA's 70-year history, trying to convince players to skip overseas contracts, trying to get broadcast networks to invest millions in rights deals, credibility is everything. Unrivaled burned that credibility before their second season even started, and the numbers prove it. Last season, Unrivaled averaged 221,000 viewers across their full season on TNT and truTV. Not spectacular, but respectable for a new 3-on-3 league. This season, they just had Paige Bickers, one of the biggest names in women's basketball, appear on national television and pull 32,000 viewers. 32,000. That's not a typo. That's an 85% drop from their season 1 average.
They kept saying 222 at all different points in this like social media announcement, and a lot of people were like, oh my gosh, they said multiple 22s, like Caitlin and possibly Angel could be joining this league, and then that just didn't happen. And Rachel DeMita is spot on. They definitely used for Caitlin Clark for promo until Caitlin Clark came and shut them the hell down. It says this misfire matters now because it eroded trust before tip-off. Last season, novelty high-stakes 3-on-3 with WNBA off-season stars drove sellouts and solid ratings. Without Clark, league faces immediate pressure to prove its model amid no-shows. And
compare that to what happened in the WNBA last season. When Caitlin Clark played, games averaged over 2 million viewers. When she sat out with an ankle sprain in late 2024, ratings dropped to 900,000, a 55% decline the moment she wasn't on the court. The league tried to hide it, listing her as day-to-day for weeks, stringing fans along with the possibility she might return. Anything to keep people tuning in. Unrivaled is experiencing the same reality. Except they never had Clark to begin with. They just borrowed her name for marketing purposes and hoped nobody would notice. But here's what makes this particularly devastating for the league. They're not just losing viewers, they're losing their broadcast partner. TNT's deal with Unrivaled includes a 3-year opt-out clause. Translation: after the 2026-27 season, TNT can walk away if the numbers don't justify the investment. And right now, with ratings cratering and arenas half empty, that opt-out is looking more like a certainty than a possibility.
Finals game, maybe on a one-on-one tournament, one-off type situations, but consistently, Caitlin Clark consistently brings the people through, brings the ratings through, and makes it a spectacular show. Here it says, compare this to the Big Three's trajectory. Ice Cube's 3-on-3 league exploded in year 1 with ex-NBA talent, but saw viewership half by season 3 as stars aged out and hype faded, mirroring Unrivaled's current freefall without fresh icons. So Unrivaled only has, like, TNT has an opt-out after next year, so TNT might...
The Big Three League offers a perfect cautionary tale here. Ice Cube launched that 3-on-3 league in 2017 with former NBA stars, massive hype, and CBS broadcast coverage. Year 1 pulled solid ratings. Year 2 saw viewership cut in half. By year 3, they were struggling to maintain relevance as the novelty wore off and the stars aged out. Unrivaled is following the exact same trajectory, except they're doing it faster because they never had the star power to begin with. Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier founded Unrivaled with the promise of keeping WNBA players stateside during the off-season, offering competitive salaries so they wouldn't have to go overseas. The average Unrivaled salary was around $220,000, plus equity stakes in the league. That was compelling when WNBA salaries maxed out around $250,000 for Supermax players. But the new WNBA collective bargaining agreement changed everything. Salaries are jumping significantly. The appeal of Unrivaled's money suddenly isn't as strong when you can make comparable money in the league that actually has the viewership, the history, and the stability.
League has stripped the circuit of must-watch appeal. Demita tied it directly to the Caitlin Clark snub, noting fans tuned out after marketing letdown. The stakes are high. Unrivaled's 6-year TNT deal includes a 3-year opt-out clause, putting broadcast revenue at risk if ratings don't rebound. This pattern echoes the WNBA's own 2024 surge when Clark's rookie year spiked over 2 million viewers, only for 2025 to dip to 900,000 amid her injury-limited play without her star power. So we have seen this across the board. From the WNBA, Caitlin Clark there, 2 million views. Caitlin Clark gone, you lose over 1 million of those viewership, 1.2 or something.
And then there's the talent drain that nobody saw coming. Jewel Lloyd, one of the league's marquee players, left to join Project B, a competing 5-on-5 league. Ryan Howard suffered an ACL tear and is out for the season. Other players are dealing with minor injuries and choosing rest over risking their WNBA careers for an upstart league with uncertain future. The roster that was supposed to be stacked with the best players in the world is starting to look thin. Meanwhile, Caitlin Clark is in Indiana, training with the Fever, preparing for a 2025 WNBA season where she'll command every headline and drive every rating. She never needed Unrivaled. Unrivaled desperately needed her. That power dynamic was obvious to everyone, except apparently the people running the league.
Unrivaled is scrambling right now. They are at risk of losing their network deal with TNT and True TV. I don't believe, if their numbers stayed away, you got to think they just had Paige Beckers on, and she cracked a whopping 32,000 viewers on national television. That is unacceptable. It's unacceptable. They're not going to keep doing this. They're not gonna keep, listen, the NBA treated y'all like charity for mad long. TNT is not. TNT don't owe y'all nothing. TNT's not gonna treat y'all the way the NBA treated y'all, losing millions.
Rachel Demita's analysis cuts to the core of this. Unrivaled built their entire marketing strategy around a player they didn't have and couldn't get. That's not just bad marketing. That's a fundamental misunderstanding of what drives viewership in women's basketball right now. Fans aren't tuning in for 3-on-3 basketball as a concept. They're not showing up because Breanna Stewart is great, even though she absolutely is. They're showing up for Caitlin Clark specifically. Her game, her story, her personality, her ability to make impossible shots look routine. The WNBA learned this lesson the hard way in 2024. The league tried to spread the credit around, tried to say the ratings boost was about the overall quality of play, about multiple rookies, about increased investment. Then Clark got hurt, and the bottom fell out. Suddenly, it became impossible to deny that one player was responsible for the majority of the surge.
They are finally ready to admit Caitlin Clark is the reason for it all. Get down in the comments, let me know what you think. Just keep the vision. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, share the channel.
So where does Unrivaled go from here? The options aren't great. They can't attract Caitlin Clark, because she's already made it clear she's not interested. They can't significantly increase their talent pool because the best players are either already in the league or choosing other options. They can't rely on their TNT deal because that opt-out clause is looming, and the network has zero incentive to keep losing money on programming that pulls 32,000 viewers. Breanna Stewart admitted in a recent interview that viewership is the key metric for measuring success. That's corporate speak for our broadcast partner is asking uncomfortable questions about ROI. When you're pulling numbers that low, you're not just underperforming, you're in existential crisis territory. Here's what makes this situation particularly fascinating from a business perspective. Unrivaled raised significant capital from investors who believed the pitch. Women's basketball is having a moment. Players want to stay in the United States during the offseason. There's an underserved market for high-level women's hoops outside the WNBA season. All of those things are technically true, but they missed the most important factor. That moment in women's basketball has a name, and her name is Caitlin Clark. The investors who put money into Unrivaled were betting on a rising tide lifting all boats. The idea that increased attention on women's basketball would translate to interest in any women's basketball product. That's a reasonable hypothesis. It's also completely wrong. What we're seeing across every metric is that Caitlin Clark specifically drives viewership, not women's basketball, as a category. When she plays, people watch. When she doesn't, they don't. It's that simple and that brutal. Think about what happened with the WNBA. The league had its best season ever by virtually every measure. Attendance up, ratings up, merchandise sales up, social media engagement up. The narrative was that women's basketball had finally broken through, that decades of investment and advocacy were paying off, that this was a sustainable new normal. Then the 2025 season started without Clark in the lineup for the first month due to her ankle injury. Ratings dropped 55%. Attendance was down 40% in non-Indiana markets. The rising tide theory collapsed immediately. Unrivaled made the same miscalculation, except they never even had Clark to lose. They assumed that WNBA fans would automatically become Unrivaled fans. They assumed that marketing around her number would create enough buzz to carry them through. They assumed that having other star players would be sufficient. Every single one of those assumptions has been proven false. The Paige Bueckers number is particularly damning. Bueckers is one of the most popular players in women's basketball. She has millions of social media followers. She's been on the cover of magazines. She's the projected #1 pick in the 2025 WNBA draft. By any reasonable measure, she should be able to draw a television audience. And yet, 32,000 people watched her Unrivaled appearance. For context, a random Indiana Fever preseason game with Caitlin Clark practicing free throws would pull better numbers than that. This isn't an indictment of Bueckers or any other player in Unrivaled. They're incredibly talented athletes playing at the highest level, but talent alone doesn't drive viewership. Storylines drive viewership. Personalities drive viewership. Cultural moments drive viewership. Right now, Caitlin Clark is the only player in women's basketball who consistently creates all three. The comparison to the Big Three League is instructive here. Ice Cube built that league around former NBA stars who still had name recognition and could still play at a high level. Allen Iverson, Chauncey Billups, Rashard Lewis, guys who had been all-stars and champions. The first season worked because of novelty and nostalgia. People wanted to see if Iverson still had it. They were curious about the 3-on-3 format. They appreciated seeing players they remembered from their prime. But by season 3, the novelty had worn off. The players had aged another 2 years, and the ratings collapsed. Turns out nostalgia has a shelf life. Unrivaled doesn't even have that nostalgia factor. These are current WNBA players in their primes. The appeal was supposed to be that you could watch elite women's basketball in January and February instead of waiting until May. But if fans wanted to watch these specific players, they'd watch the WNBA. The only reason to watch Unrivaled instead would be if it offered something the WNBA doesn't. And right now, the answer to what does Unrivaled offer that the WNBA doesn't is a worse viewing experience with lower stakes and no Caitlin Clark. The financial implications are staggering. TNT is paying Unrivaled for broadcast rights. The exact number hasn't been disclosed, but industry estimates put it in the range of several $1 million per season. When you're paying that kind of money and getting 32,000 viewers, the math doesn't work. For comparison, TNT pays the NBA about $2.6 billion per year and gets millions of viewers per game. The cost per viewer for NBA games is reasonable. The cost per viewer for Unrivaled is astronomical. That 3-year opt-out clause exists specifically for this scenario. TNT included it because they weren't sure if Unrivaled would find an audience. Now they have their answer. Unless something dramatic changes in the next 18 months, TNT will exercise that opt-out, and Unrivaled will be looking for a new broadcast partner. And good luck finding one after you've demonstrated that you can't draw viewers, even with national television promotion and established WNBA stars. The streaming option isn't much better. Sure, Unrivaled could move to YouTube or another platform and try to build an audience there. But streaming numbers for women's basketball outside the WNBA are even worse than broadcast numbers. Without the promotional muscle of a major network, without the legitimacy that comes from being on TNT, Unrivaled would be competing with thousands of other sports streams for attention. And we already know how that story ends, because we've seen it play out with other leagues that lost their broadcast deals. Breanna Stewart and Nafisa Collier deserve credit for trying to create something new. The idea of keeping WNBA players stateside during the off-season is genuinely good for the players. The salaries and equity stakes they offered were competitive. The 3-on-3 format is entertaining. They did a lot of things right from a pure basketball perspective. But they made one catastrophic error. They built a business model that required Caitlin Clark's participation without actually securing Caitlin Clark's participation. That November 2025 marketing campaign, with all the 22 references, wasn't just misleading. It was a tacit admission that they knew they needed Clark to succeed. They knew that without her, the interest wouldn't be there. So they tried to manufacture that interest through implication and innuendo, hoping that by the time people realized Clark wasn't coming, they'd already be invested in the product. It's the business equivalent of catfishing, and the audience is rightfully pissed about it. Rachel Demita was one of the first mainstream analysts to call this out, and she took heat for it at the time. People accused her of being a hater, of not supporting women's sports, of trying to tear down something positive, but she was right. She saw through the marketing, recognized the bait and switch, and predicted exactly what would happen when the season started without Clark. Now that her predictions have come true, suddenly everyone else is comfortable admitting the same thing. This pattern of denial followed by reluctant acceptance has been consistent throughout the Caitlin Clark era. First, people denied that she was solely responsible for the WNBA's ratings surge. Then the numbers made denial impossible. Then people denied that her absence would significantly impact viewership. Then she got injured, and ratings dropped 55%. Now people are denying that Unrivaled's struggles are directly related to her absence. How long until that denial becomes unsustainable too? The reality is that women's basketball is experiencing a Caitlin Clark boom, not a women's basketball boom. Those are related but distinct phenomena. A women's basketball boom would mean increased interest across all women's basketball products. A Caitlin Clark boom means increased interest specifically in things Caitlin Clark is involved in. We're clearly experiencing the latter. Unrivaled is just the latest product to learn that lesson the expensive way. So what happens next? Unrivaled has the rest of the season to turn things around. They need to find a way to make their product compelling without the player everyone wants to see. That means better marketing, better storylines, better engagement with the audience they do have. It means accepting that they're not going to be a mainstream phenomenon, and instead focusing on serving the core women's basketball audience that exists, independent of Caitlin Clark. It means realistic expectations and sustainable business models rather than hype and hope. But honestly, the most likely outcome is that TNT exercises their opt-out. Unrivaled either folds or becomes a minor streaming product, and the lesson gets reinforced once again. In women's basketball right now, there's Caitlin Clark, and then there's everyone else. That's not a knock on other players. It's just the reality of where the sport is in January 20. Maybe that changes over time. Maybe other players develop into similar draws. Maybe the audience broadens beyond one superstar. But that's not where we are today. For now, Unrivaled serves as a perfect case study in what happens when you build a business plan around an asset you don't control. They needed Caitlin Clark. They couldn't get Caitlin Clark. They pretended they might get Caitlin Clark.